What's up, Dave?
What's up, dude?
Hey, man. How's it going?
Good. How you been?
Uh, Living the dream, bro, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm very excited. Since I met you, I've wanted to get you on here to kind of pull your brain apart and dive in and see what's going on underneath the hood.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's what I connected with you. What, maybe a year and a half ago? 2 years now?
Yeah, I think it was during the COVID era, right? I think it was
Yeah.
kind of somewhere around that.
Yep.
Um, yeah, man. So, I'd love to kind of start this off kind of because I don't know a huge amount about like your past other than talking to you and what I see online. I would love to know what David the Kid was like. And I ask you because I always find it so cool to like talk to other creative people and like figure out like what good stuff happened to you or what bad stuff happened to you that made you want to pursue the arts, because it's such a weird like pursuit that we're involved in, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I would say nothing about what I do has been a very traditional, upbringing, whether that's music or art. In high school, there was a lot of house parties happening, and Long. I grew up in Long Beach, and Long Beach is a big kind of music town, and a lot of different venues. At the time, we would go see Sublime play at house parties, and just No Doubt was coming up, and there was a whole ton of musicians kind of surrounding the Long Beach music scene, and I was a fan. I never played an instrument growing up, religiously. You know, went to shows, and then I found out that if you become friends with the musicians and you carry their instruments in, you get in free. so,
There you go.
so being a broke kid, that was a pretty good way to kind of hack the system. And I just fell in love with just going to shows and kind of peeking behind the curtain. And I had a lot of friends that were in bands growing up and in high school and stuff. And I think when I graduated from high school, as a graduation gift to myself, I bought myself a bass and
Okay.
didn't know how to play it. Was like, all right, well, let me, and at the time I was listening to a lot of reggae. And so I was just trying to like, kind of mimic what was going on and kind of fumbling around. And, you kind of do something long enough and you kind of start to slowly figure it out. And I mean, to this day, just, I'm sure you're the same way with art. You're always going to be a student. There's always going to be something that, there's just art, music. It's so vast that, if you think you mastered one instrument, well, it's like there's a ton of other instruments that I'm like, now I want to play the drums. Now I want to learn, guitar or piano. So, I'm sure with art, it's the same way. You're like, just when you think like, cool, I think I've got this like painting thing down, then you're like, oh, I like sculptures. Like, how do you
Yeah.
how do you make that stuff? And kind of the creative, process just kind of starts all over again.
Dude, that's so true. Yeah, I always wonder that about myself. Like, I kind of like, take myself out of my brain and do the 30,000 foot view of like, to try to dissect the business part, but then also to try to figure out like what am I doing right or wrong or different or whatever with my technique or my talents or whatever. And it's like I kind of like look back and I'm like, did I make a mistake by kind of exploring everything? Because it seems like a lot of like musicians and visual artists do really well, like as far as business advice goes, like sticking to just one thing. And yet I can't do it. I love learning everything. Like behind me,
Yeah.
it's like I have like you said, I have sculpture, oil painting, acrylics, like my digital stuff. I'm learning how to do audio with this fancy microphone in front of me. I have my instruments over here. I'm trying to learn multiple instruments. So it's just I find so much like fun and fascination with like just like eating like a humble sandwich and just sucking at things so bad, because it's like it is fun to kind of go from like nothing to like, whoa, I could do something like with this. Was that a part of you since you were a kid, or was that did that kind of evolve as you got into like the music scene?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I feel like I have ADD where just, it's you scroll through Instagram and I'm just like inspired by every artist that I follow, every artist that I don't know that just gets kind of put into my feed. And it's like I want to do everything. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cool. Like, and my brain is always trying to like analyze, like, okay, if I were going to do that, how would I do that? And I would kind of break down the process. And it's hard. Sometimes you got to just rein that back. And for you, I know that you have a very distinct style that you've been kind of honing for years. And you might not think that you do, but from the outside, it's very evident. But for you, you did your journey, and you're at this point, and maybe you want to go in 10 different directions, but you're doing what you're doing right now. but you have a very distinct style. And it's like, it's hard, it's hard to just stay focused and say, I'm going to keep doing this. Even if it's not the current trend right now, I'm just going to keep doing this. And eventually that trend will scoop into you and someone will be like, wow, I just stumbled upon this artist who's been doing this for years. This is amazing work. Like, why isn't this guy more known? And then all of a sudden you get kind of your shot. So it's the same way with music too. It's you go out there, you're influenced by all different styles. I mean, people just don't listen to one genre of music on their playlist. But then if you're going to pick up an instrument and play music, what do? Like you have to kind of pick something and then stick with it. You can't just, one day I want to play classical music and then the next day I want to do death metal. And, maybe there's a hidden genre there that's yet to be discovered,
Man.
but
I think you're like speaking about my artistic demise. I feel like inside my head, because it's like I am like that. I'm like I love listening to like jazz. Like I listen to Miles Davis for like hours, and then I'll flick on like Pantera or Metallica, and then I'll flick on like Jay-Z or whatever. And it's like I feel like artistically though I'm the same way. Like I really, really am super into like the old masters, like Renaissance painting, and like I've studied those techniques, but then I also am super into digital art. I'm into like more graffiti stuff, and it's like it's always interesting hearing like a fellow artist like yourself who really knows his shit, and hearing other people tell me like, oh, Jay, you have your style, blah blah blah. Because in my head I don't. Like in my head I'm still doing a lot of stuff, and it is hard to just focus on one thing. But then the other side of it is like once you do it like for a living, whether it's music or art, then all of a sudden you have this like pressure, whether it's implied or more so internally or externally, where it's like, all right, well, Dave's the guy that does this, this, and this, and Jay's the guy that does that, and I want to see Dave do more of that thing, but Dave might be like, well, I don't want to do that thing, I want to do this thing, and like, and then I become known as the guy that does this particular type of art, and I'm like, you know what, I want to do something else, but then it's like, all of a sudden, your fan base, people that love you for musically or artistically are like, well, what are you doing screwing this up, man? I was really into your thing. We were in it together, bro. Like, why are you screwing it up, So it's like a weird dance,
Yeah, and the art is half the equation these days. It's like putting a brush to a canvas. That's half the battle. Creating great art, and now the other half is the marketing. And like how you were saying that, you've got to get marketing tools and take videos and be able to like email people. And it's like, there's this whole other business side that you can't just be a hermit and live in a cave and create great art. It's like, no one will ever find you. And there's a lot of noise out there, to cut through. I mean, you turn on social media and you're just constantly inundated with just, people in their own little world doing their own little thing and just beating you over the head with it. So how do you not annoy people in the process, but let the world know that, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm creating, and if you're interested in it, come over into my world. And it's a balancing act, but you can't just be an artist. You have to be a business person, a marketing expert, you have to wear all these other hats, and it's hard because artists, our brains operate in a way where it would be nice to just wake up every day and just be like, oh, I'm just gonna go out in the backyard and paint these beautiful landscapes and just, listen to the birds and that's my life. But in the reality, it's like you're spending a lot of time on social media. You're trying to like figure out different marketing tips and tricks. And it's like, do I have to animate my stuff? Do I need to make videos of things and be in front of a camera? And it's like, some people are shy. Some people don't want to be in front of a camera. They want the art to speak for themselves. And in this digital age with social media, they're at a disadvantage.
What you're kind of speaking to is like really good advice for creative people listening, because, excuse me, I'm choking on my coffee for some reason. I'm having a problem learning how to swallow my coffee today. But you're speaking to like the creative that's listening, and that's thinking to themselves like, I wish I could do like what Dave or Jay or whoever does, like, because they see the polished, shiny side of stuff, the glamorous stuff, the pictures, like the stuff that we curate to put online, and it's like, a lot of people don't realize how much you do have to sacrifice, with your time and your energy and your attention and all that stuff in order to get to a certain level. And yeah, when you get to a certain level, of like a crazy level, like I'm sure Taylor Swift is not sitting there doing her own social media, right? Like when you get to an insane level, someone else does it for you. But it's like at the level that a lot of people are coming into, and even like mid or higher level people, you're still stuck dealing with this stuff. And that kind of brings me to a question. I'm asking this like genuinely, because I'm trying to sort this out in my own brain. is like, how do you personally hold on to like the magic? Because there was like a magic from how you were describing, like carrying instruments and amps for guys to see shows and like the excitement of it, and I relate to that in a lot of ways. There was a magic there. There's a reason. There was something there that you wanted, something bigger than yourself. And like, as you get involved, like you've been involved in so many insane things, like with your art, with your music, and the people you meet and the stuff you've done, like, and that becomes like, I guess, normal after a while. How do you like get out of that desensitization of career, and how do you keep like the magic alive?
Well, I think you said a good word earlier is humble. It's like you still have to put in the work. Like there's still long hours where, I'm in the studio and I'm painting, and it's quiet, and a lot of times I'll have music going, and sometimes I don't, because being a musician and a producer myself, when I start to hear music, my brain starts to analyze the music, and I start to think of it. I kind of just how I'm like dissecting or dissecting I'm dissecting music as well, and going, oh, okay, well, how much reverb is on that snare, and are they using a limiter on these vocals? And it just, sometimes I need to like just shut everything off and just hyper focus and just like sit there and just, all right, I'm going to do these dots for the next hour and just, stipple away or whatever, So I think it's, you still have to do the work, with music. All these producers and DJs, and they're on stage with these big lights and all this stuff. Like, you still have to be in the studio. You still have, you can't just bounce from one party to the next party and think that your life is some glamorous thing. It's like, you still have to be on the grind, like in the shed, crunching away. And people don't see that part of it. I mean, you can, because that's kind of like the boring part, like it'd be, I mean, visuals might be a little bit interesting because you're actually like kind of, creating this stuff, but like, music, like if you just heard a guy in front of a computer listening to the same 2-bar loop for like 4 hours, just working on like very small details, from the next room, you would think that person would be insane. You're like, I've heard that thing for just like, shut it off. I can't take it anymore. But it's like, you're like, no, I'm doing something here. I'm like, fine tuning things. So, with art, it's the same thing. It's like, sometimes you're just like, doing these very small things, and then you step back, and then you've created something amazing, but you still have to put in the work.
Speaking of what you just said, before I get onto the question I was going to ask you, which I'll probably forget, well, you were just talking about like getting up close and doing your stipple work and backing up. I've been working on a couple different paintings, and it's interesting because it's like when you're up close, I'm sure you experience the same thing. It's almost like you're working within like a composition within a composition. And it's like you zoom in your attention on this like little section, and that little section becomes its own painting. And it's like it deserves everything. And then you back up and you realize like that's really not that important to spend all your time on. It sometimes becomes almost like too tight. And then it's like it gets to the point where it's like, all right, well, now I just dug myself in a hole. I have to either make the rest of this piece as tight to kind of match that stylistically, or I have to somehow loosen things up all over, which is even harder. I'd imagine it's the same with music. That's like such a mind fuck. It really is, like,
I've done that before. I do, a lot of concert posters, and I've done that before where like, you create something that's so detailed, and then you kind of step back for a second, and you're like, what did I just do? This is going to take so long to just continue this pattern over the whole thing.
Yeah.
That you're like, man, it's almost like you just should start over and just like reinvent the whole thing, and just kind of dumb it down a little bit to where you're like, people are going to be viewing this thing from across the room.
Right.
They're not going to see that you've done all these little like micro stipples in this one little corner of this. It's just like, I'm wasting time here. I got to start over.
I kind of like find a hard time balancing that, because I personally like, I used to be obsessed. I still am with like Salvador Dali, or like certain people who do go like insanely deep. Like I used to like love in college just getting baked and staring at paintings and be like, oh my God, I see a composition in the eyeball. I didn't know it was that. I love that side of art, and I love kind of hiding things in pieces that maybe people won't see. But then it does get to the point where it's like it loses its soul, like it loses the energy, because it becomes so polished that there's not that looseness. And sometimes I like do paintings, and I'll take pictures like throughout to kind of document and journal and kind of learn from myself. And I'll look at a process like one week in where it has like magic to it. It's still so rough. And then later on, it looks awesome, like in my opinion, but it kind of loses something. It's too like too much.
Mhm.
Like, dude, like
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle there is like the magic zone.
Yeah, and that's a good process, to always be kind of like, learning and trying to dissect and try to like just, make things concise. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a beauty sometimes when you see a lot of like, maybe Asian art where it's just very simple forms, but that person, it looks like maybe someone just picked up a brush and did something, really, really quick and easy. But that took years to figure out how to
Right.
like cut away all the BS and just get to the essence of what you're trying to, convey. And, you know, art is just us speaking to the world and having a conversation. And are you going to get there in fewer words? And that's a lot of times that's better.
Talk to me about bass, because I was just listening to. Have you gotten into Rick Rubin's podcast, by the way?
No, but I've seen, documentaries, and he's a fascinating,
So good.
fascinating.
Podcast is awesome. He had John Frusciante from the Chili Peppers on for like the fourth time or something, and it's just so interesting hearing him. He was just kind of saying how like his creative process. He used to kind of like get really lost in like making things overly complex, and then he realized that he had to kind of back it off to kind of complement the song versus showing off almost. And I'm wondering how that plays out with you with bass, because bass is definitely an instrument that like successfully needs that balance, right? Like you really need like the balance of like steady, like boring beat almost to kind of vibe with the drummer, but then you have to also kind of know how to like embellish the notes to make it super interesting on its own. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, it's like if you flip on YouTube or you scroll through social media, and if you're like oh, I'm going to check out bass players, and everyone's sitting there doing this crazy stuff, like, oh, look at this, I'm tapping and popping and slapping and doing all this crazy stuff, but you never hear any of that in any like song on the radio. So like, why would you learn these skills that don't translate into something that's like viable for your success at,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you're in like some insane like fusion jazz, trio that you like have to do all this insane stuff, but like a lot of the more pop focused or radio based stuff, it's like, yeah, you're right, you don't hear that stuff. So, and especially with reggae, it's almost like the notes that you don't play. So
Right.
it's kind of like, people look at a Picasso and they're like, man, this guy doesn't even know how to draw. And it's like, no, he was trained,
Yeah.
classically to know proportions, but then he had to understand that in order to break the rules. Same thing with music. It's like you have to know fundamentally, your scales and understand technically like everything that you can do. But the beauty of it is then to scale that down and to always keep in mind that like if you're just in your room making a YouTube video and you want to slap and do all this crazy stuff, then go nuts. But like if you're making a song, you're working with other people and you're focusing on how can all of us come together and work together to make the best version of the song, and to always keep the song is the most important thing, and usually vocals are probably the most important thing within the song. And you always have to ask yourself, okay, I've got this idea. Is it strengthening the vocals? Is it supporting the vocals? Is it making the song better as a whole? Is it making the listener want to feel comfortable? And yeah, as a bass is kind of in between a rhythm instrument. So it's almost like a drum, where like a lot of like the lower notes you're locking in with the kick drum and it's very methodical. But then there's melody to it also. And the beauty of it is, some of the really great bass players understand that and can weave themselves in and out where you're a rhythm instrument a lot of the times, and then you're a melodic instrument to kind of do a little, embellishment here, a little fill. So it's, I'm still every day, it's a learning process. You get up and just when you think you're like, all right, I got it. And then you approach a new song and you're like, you'll sit there for hours and be like, wait, what am I doing? And then you just simplify everything back down. And then you're like, yeah, that feels right. I should have just done that from the beginning. So, same thing with the cleaning.
Totally, dude. It's like it's interesting. It's an interesting topic to think about, because I often catch myself like I'll do if it's a painting or a piece of art on my own, I'll catch myself going through periods where I want to get super deep and complex and crazy because I genuinely want to do that. And then after I finish that, I'll want to do something more like composition based. It's more like simplified. And I feel like it's constantly like a stretch, like a pulling and pushing and back and forth just to try to figure out where I want to be. And it's like, I wonder sometimes if people looking from the outside, are they seeing this as being like too different? Are they seeing the coalescing, like the conversation almost I'm having in my head of like simplifying and making more complex. And like you mentioned Picasso, there's an amazing documentary. Did you see that with Antonio Banderas? It's called
I don't know.
it's called Real Genius. It was on, forgot what network. It was so amazing, but I learned so much about him that I didn't realize that he really was like classically trained. And it's interesting because you see art and like there's a difference between making things simplified or making things simple almost because that's all you can do, and making it simple because it's almost like accidentally you landed there, as opposed to like having a very wide vocabulary and a very large educational base and like being able to pick and choose what goes there. And sometimes it probably lands in the same place, and to someone listening or watching or looking, they may or may not realize that. But there's something magical when someone really can kind of do whatever they want, but they choose to do less.
Right.
Yeah. How does that play with your art? Like, do you find yourself like jumping around between things? What's your pushing and pulling like?
Yeah. So, a big thing happened recently to me, and I guess, kind of peeking behind the curtain on this is, I would say if I had to kind of define my style, it'd be, street, but just like a lot of weird colors and weird vibes. And this last album, we were looking at different artists, and some of the guys in the group had like, found some really great artists that they're like, hey, we love this style. Very simplified, very toned down, and more like image, like icon based, and they approached them, and they all, we couldn't connect with any artists. Like the people were just like, no, we're too hip that we're not even going to return your calls. Yeah. So, John, our percussion player, he's good at it. He does a lot of the poster art. Like he'll find, great, incredible artists online, and he'll connect with them and say, hey, we love your work. Do you want to make posters for us? So John approached me, and he was like, hey, do you want to design the cover for our next album? We were thinking about getting artists that look like this. And I looked at it, and originally I told him no, because I saw the art and I was like, that's not what I do. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. Why don't you go to, ask the artist that you like? And he's like, well, we did. And we either couldn't connect with them. They just told us no. And I was like, all right, well, let me take a stab at it, And so I started kind of, at first you kind of like, mimic, and you're trying to like, okay, let me understand like what it is about this art that has this unique style to it. And I started doing some sketching and some drawing. And I think at some point it kind of morphs because like it's still you. So you still pull no matter what what you're doing today is kind of you. At some point you were just copying something else down the line that inspired you.
Yeah.
And then through you being you and your own, skill set and just ambitions and dreams, you have morphed whatever, all these different factors in your life into what you're actually creating today.
Mm-hmm.
I think it kind of did that. And then I kind of looked at it and I was like, well, this is very simplified. It's still a high caliber of art, but it's not sitting there doing these little tiny stipples and having this really like, drippy looking, type of art. It's very like, just like symbolic, like here it is, stamp. You got to get it right, because if you're going to speak with fewer strokes,
right,
those strokes have to be very important,
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of went down this rabbit hole, and I created the album art. And now I'm in the process of going, and every single song from our last album, I'm creating that artwork for its own kind of like single look that I guess we're going to be making a lot of like lyric videos. So I just think it, like that was such a weird thing where like pivoting, going like, oh, well, this isn't necessarily that something that I do, but I'm open to the idea.
Right.
And it's fun, and it takes less time, and it's kind of like, wow, okay, like there's something here, and now because of that, now I'm creating like a whole set of like lino prints that has kind of like this look, like everything around like the album art is like a portal, it's like some sort of portal shape. Okay. And then there's like elements from the song that's inside of the portal. And I've kind of taken that and kind of like, made a whole other line of just, outside of what like the band is doing, of similar things, which, it works. Like the imagery is there. It's very cohesive. So I guess that the point of that story is like, staying fluid in the journey, and just not like, originally I was kind of like, well, that's not me, I don't do that. Like, because I think as an artist, you kind of want to be known for like, I came up with this idea and I'm this person, and this is my story. But you got to stay open to the world, because the world is constantly, changing in front of you, and it's how you adapt to the things around you, I think, is what makes you successful. Like, I mean, I don't know Picasso's whole story, but at some point he probably looked at the stuff that he was doing and was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Or maybe there was some other influence. I mean, you watched the doc. I don't know if they went into this, but like, what caused him to get to that point where he was like, yeah, I don't want to do this, but I want to do this other crazy stuff that like was not his style, but he made it his style. And it's kind of the same thing that happened to me, is just seeing opportunity and being fluid enough to morph. And really, it was kind of like an ego thing. It was just like, wait, like, I want people to approach me for the art that I do, because what I do is so important. And it was really like having to take a step back and being like, well, okay, maybe, like the world is throwing me a curveball right now. Like, do I swing at it, or do I just, strike out? So I took a chance, and it worked, because now it kind of opened up this whole other door.
You just said something that makes me want to dive into this. I want you to talk about ego. One of my favorite authors, I don't know if you've read any Eckhart Tolle's books, but one of my favorite authors is Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, and also A New Earth. And for anyone listening that's not familiar with those books, like, he talks about ego in an interesting way. He talks about it as like anything or anyone that kind of makes you feel superior or inferior. It's kind of an interesting twist on the definition, because a lot of times, like, traditionally people think of ego as like, oh, I got an ego problem. I'm the best. I'm the greatest. But it's also like the part of you that's like, no, you're fucking shit. You suck. And it's like, it is kind of a fluctuation, the ego. It tricks us, and it's like fools us into our identity. And I know, just because I'm a visual artist, that being a visual artist involves a lot of that, right? Like, there's a lot of times when you're like, I freaking suck. And then there's times where you're like riding the high of like, I'm the greatest artist that ever lived. I would imagine it's the same with music. And like, I would love for you to speak off the cuff on this topic, because it's like, obviously you have the experience with your art that I can sort of relate to, but then you also have this super unique experience as a bassist who, is in a band that's extremely successful and had like a lot of like accolades and a lot of crazy experiences, like, which is very unique. And I could only imagine from being around other musicians that I know, that when you are behind the velvet rope, you get a lot of like people kissing your ass, but then you also have people criticizing you. So I'm like, how do you deal with both sides of the coin of ego, and like, how do you sort of save yourself before either side gets too powerful?
I think earlier in our career, when we would, put out music, we would be online and just looking for comments, and people, you want to hear all the praise, and like the negative stuff, you're like, not so much. But, a lot of us would be reacting to that stuff as if like the couple trolls that are on there that are, trying to stir up stuff or have an effect on you. And I think for me personally, it's to the point where like, you almost want that, because if what you're doing isn't that good, then no one takes you seriously. And everyone's gonna kind of have like a soft spot in their heart for like, oh, you're just like the local guy down at the craft fair that's just trying. And, it's like he's painting these landscapes and they don't look that good and no one's really buying them. But, like no one goes up and just goes, this stuff is terrible. Like, you call yourself an artist, like what's going on? But it takes, so it's almost like the more criticism that you get, the better that you're doing.
Yeah.
Because that means that your net is getting wider. And you're not going to appeal to everybody, like there's going to be people that look at your stuff and go, yeah, not for me, just, I'm not into it. And some people might even be like, this is terrible. Like, this guy calls himself an artist. Like, why would you ever do this? But, so we've kind of learned over the years that like the more hate that we get for something, we feel good about it. Cause we're like, we know we're doing something right, cause like, you just don't want someone to just be like indifferent, right. Like you either, I want someone to either love something or hate something, but just the whole like, move on. It's like, you don't like, if you had an art show, you don't want people just to kind of look at your art and go, and just go to the next one, right. Like you want people to either be like, this is awesome, or be like, this is terrible. Cause the whole, thing about an artist is you're trying to evoke emotion. Same thing with music. It's like the best music, it's not what is actually happening in the track, but it's how it makes you feel, as a person. So your art, it's like if someone storms out and is like, it's like they're still inspired by that. Like maybe they're so pissed off about your art that they're going to go become an artist themselves or go buy the other art down the street because, they're like, okay, well, this is all crap. I'm going to go buy the good stuff down the street. Well, you just helped out your fellow artist because now you made a sale down the street, for someone else. So I think that like, really kind of like flipping the whole thing. Whereas like before we would be hypersensitive. It's like, oh, there's a guy from Tulsa, Oklahoma that doesn't like our album. Like, what do we do? And now we're just like, the more, the better, like you go on YouTube and there's people giving thumbs down. They're like, this is terrible. It's like, yeah, but you listen to it,
right?
Like you have a reaction to it, and it's like, that's really important. So I think translating that back into the art scene, it's like, be open for criticism. I mean, that's the only way that you're going to like, because maybe what someone is saying about your art, maybe it is true, and you're blinded by, it's like whenever you create something, you're always like, this is the best thing that I've done. Like, I'm so stoked on it. And same thing with music. It's like, you always like the last song that you written because you put some time into it, and you're emotionally, invested in this thing. And, to be able to kind of like, push that back and go, okay, well, can I write a better song? Like, is this song not the greatest song? And it's like, you're not always going to write a smash hit, it's like, and you're not always trying to do that. Like, there's songs that when we're writing, we're kind of like, this one's kind of floating to the surface where we're like, there's something really catchy and sticky here. So like, I think that this is going to be what we're going to go after for like a radio single. And we're really going to like push more into it. And then there's other things where you're like, this isn't a single, but this is a really vibey, crazy, weird B-side that we just think it'll be like a fan favorite. It'll be a deep cut that like people, they're not going to get like the thing about the hits is, that it's going to get big and then people are going to get burnt out on it. Right. And then at some point it's going to be an eye roll where they're just like, oh, this song, because they remember like, oh, I had to listen to this song for a whole summer, right. And it's like, now I'm just like burnt out. But that B-side, when that comes on, they're always going to be like, oh, I remember this song. I don't know it that well, but like, I like it. Like, I want to keep it on the playlist instead of like shuffling those big hits off because you're just like, I'm sick of listening to this song because I've heard it a million times.
It's almost like that thing of like when your band becomes too popular and it kind of sells out in air quotes and like, but you know, they were cool when I liked them. Like having like that, like you're describing with the songs, is if you know like the less popular songs, it's almost like gives you an ability to be in a more niche type club. It's like, you know, like, you know, Nirvana could not be bigger, right? But it's like, I'm still super into the Bleach album because not as many people know it, you know, but I also like, it's not as played as much. So it's like, that is interesting. There is kind of like a, you know, level of like coolness or community or something going on with that. That's really that's interesting. Yeah. I'm wondering, hearing you talk, I'm like really wondering, I don't know how to word this question in a way that's going to make any sense, but I'm going to go for it. Everyone kind of has a way of like thinking or like processing the world or like seeing things, hearing things, communicating, etc. I'm like wondering if you notice or have noticed like similarities in the way that you internally dissect and communicate music and art. Like with art, there's certain shapes or certain things or certain colors that we're drawn to that, like, you know, I'm very attached to like light, and I also love, you know, playing with colors and light, and I really love composition and shape and distorting perspectives. Someone else might not be. And I think, for me, I think that kind of has like a similarity in like the music I like. You know, I like jazz for instance, because I love how it kind of goes on tangents, and then I love how like it melodically kind of catches itself and like people lead it in different ways. I kind of like that, and I'm wondering like what I see you bobbing your head, so I can't wait to hear you answer. So
no, there was, I mean, so you know, when we're off the road, my days are usually consist of, you know, coming down into my studio and either working on music or art. And some days my head just spins in a swivel because I'm like, I don't know, you know, should I be painting this? Should I be on my, you know, iPad drawing, you know, something? Should I be, you know, working on some music? Should I be learning how to play bass better, how to play guitar better, how to play piano better, how to program, you know?
Yeah.
So there's all these different things. And some days I find that some of my happiest days are when I'm like, and I don't even do this on purpose, but I'll start off like coming down to my studio. Maybe I'll pick up the bass and play bass for maybe like an hour and just kind of like, practice and try to get better at that. And then I'll go into like, oh, I got to work on a little bit of art, on the computer. And then I'll switch over and like paint some stuff. And and then at the end of the day, then I'm like back and like, maybe like doing some more stuff on the computer, like with music or whatever. And I didn't really plan it, but like, you look back and you're like, wow, like I just did this crazy day where I'm like bouncing back and forth. And at some point, it might've been like last year or whatever, I think my brain started to kind of fuse the two. And I found myself getting to a point where I like found it in both doing art and music, where it was just kind of that aha moment where it's like, I'm operating on similar like levels when I kind of like, you figure something out and then you're like, oh yeah, like I'm going to keep doing more of that. And, maybe I think it was like with music programming, and I was like arranging a song and kind of working with like plugins and different sonics or whatever. And my brain just kind of like had this very like this like comfortable sense of like, okay, like I mean, usually art's like walking a tightrope. You're just like, I don't know if this is going to work. For 90% of the journey, you're just on this tightrope going, I don't know if I'm gonna
I don't know where this is going. I don't know what I'm doing. Like,
right. And if anyone were to look over your shoulder in that 90% of the time, they would just be like, what are you doing? And then it all comes together right at the end. But, music's the same way. You're sitting there with a bunch of bleeps and bloops and just like stuff is all crazy, and you just, you wrangle it and it all comes together. But yeah, it's very weird, like to just have my brain kind of like infuse the two and really kind of like, maybe at some point, like your brain doesn't know the difference, like whether you're working on art or music, because it's still just like a creative process. And I think like when you first are learning art or music, you're just mimicking stuff. You're going like, okay, well, I'm inspired by this artist or that artist or these visuals or this color palette, and you're just like copying, you're mimicking, and then at some point that starts to change a little bit. Like some of the biggest prolific bands in the world started out as cover bands. Like, Beatles, Rolling Stones, like they were all cover bands at first. But what that does is it teaches you these are the fundamentals of like what hit songs are. And if we're a cover band, you play in the bar.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to hear the hits, so you play whatever's popular at the time. But then at some point, your brain can't differentiate between like you learning and playing these other people's songs and then just what's naturally, if you pick up a guitar and go, oh, I want to write a song, it's like you're gonna just by default just belch out hit songs, And I mean, it's true. Beatles did that. Rolling Stones did that. So as an artist, I think that's kind of like the same path. It's like, maybe you're sketching some of the greats, you're like, oh, like I'm studying, like Michelangelo or whatever, and you're starting to do that. And then by default, that just becomes part of your nature.
Right.
To where even if you veer off and you're doing like graffiti art at some point, that concept of like shading and position, like composition, like positioning, like, hands and strength of things. And like, that's just going to come out whether you know it or not, because it's just locked in your brain somewhere.
Dude. Yes. I just like, I love these topics. I can talk for hours about just this shit. It's almost like, when you paint or make music in an intuitive way, it's almost like you're saying, you're building up this vocabulary. So there's like the academic part of it there, but it's almost like, at some point when you're learning how to, like I have young kids, and when they're learning grammar and whatnot, you have to know at a certain point, this is an adverb and this is whatever and blah, 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 blah. And my daughter will come home and be like, oh, I learned whatever prepositions or whatever it might be. I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but I know how to speak, so I must know it. And at a point where you no longer have to think about like color theory, music theory, whatever, and things just kind of happen. And then it's like you go to a museum or you hear a song, and like you said, it may not be at all obvious that you're taking some kind of influence, but there's like a feeling that there's something, a feeling intuitively that's there that like is going on, that is just such a magical thing. And which kind of brings me to the next thing I want to ask you about is like, how much is like, the infamous zone, like getting in the zone? How much of that is you versus like theory or like more intellectual type work, like music, art, whichever one you want to riff off of? But like, how much, for me, I love chasing the zone, whatever that cheesy thing is, but like that feeling of like you could not make a mistake if you freaking tried. I think like just kind of happening by itself, and then you lose it, and you're like, oh my god, get me back there right now. And like also, I kind of related to that is like what you do to get into that place, whatever it is for you.
I think, a lot of times like your first instinct is like the best one. And we learned, to put that on the music side, when we were in Nashville recording the Supermoon album, and we were working with the producer David Cobb, and he's like amazing producer. He's every year he wins a ton of Grammys. He's big in the country world. He works with Chris Stapleton. We were in there, and a lot of that album we wrote on the spot there. Like we would come in the morning, Dave would be vibing to some different records and trying to get inspiration. And then he'd be like, all right, cool. Like, does anyone have any ideas? Or maybe I have this little weird guitar thing, like how can we riff off this?
Yeah.
And we'd go in, and a lot of those songs we recorded in like one room. It was like, Matt was over there playing drums, and I was, plugged into a bass, and it was kind of like one take type stuff. And we would do these takes, and then we would be like, oh, well, let's, like, I think I messed up a little bit here. Like something was off. Like, let's go back. And Dave would be like, no, we're keeping that. Like, we're gonna, if there's something catastrophic, we can maybe like, cut it out and splice something together. Mm-hmm. But like, he's like, usually the first instinct is usually the best,
Yeah.
I think it takes a certain level to get to that point, because obviously if you're kind of fumbling around with your instrument and you're a beginner, there is some hard studying and theory and stuff that you have to learn. But to be able to take those training wheels off at some point and kind of find your own path, and just like, going back to the whole, like, music and art is a conversation,
Yeah.
So usually the first thought that you have is usually the correct one. And if music and art is a conversation, then like, that's kind of, you have to go with that instinct. I mean, how many times have you like picked up and like sketched something really loosely, like not even really thinking about it? And then you're like, oh, I really like that. There was some sort of like movement in that just like was, and then you're like, okay, well now I'm going to kind of recreate that and clean it up.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're having a really hard time because you're like, man, the portions are off. And even though, the first thing you did might not be like anatomically correct or just even like totally correct within itself, there was some sort of like beauty within just like not overthinking something and just naturally how like you would do something without, your brain kind of catching up to what your hand is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself going back and just being like, I'm going to use that original. Like, I'm just going to like, I'll clean it up a little bit and do whatever, but I'm not going to redraw it because that was the initial thing that was like the beauty in it. And so to get into the zone, I think it's like, it's doing that, it's like, maybe trying to create without thinking, if that makes any sense.
I've had that experience on both, like the good and the bad of that experience. Like especially if you're like, bringing in like weed or drinking or some other thing into your body, it's like I'm sure everyone's experienced this. It's like you have moments where you're like, oh my God, that is like something I never would have tried or done, or the spontaneity there, or like the looseness, or like just the level of like not caring, not being attached to something, like being willing to like screw up.
Right.
When you get to that point, whether it's through natural or altered state, whatever, when you get there, there's something that happens that doesn't normally happen. I think it could, but then also there's that thing where you wake up the next day and you're like, what was I thinking? Or like, oh, I just screwed up an entire piece because I thought I was a genius, and I was like, what was I thinking? It's a hard, it's a hard thing to kind of balance. Do you find that?
Yeah. I mean, art should be experimentation.
Yeah.
You should definitely try to like, I mean, you do what you do, which is good in your core, but you should always be expanding and trying different things and knocking on different doors. And some of them open and some of them don't. And,
right.
I think it's, I was watching this thing the other day where it was this like guy that was trying to do this like typography stuff where he had a big canvas and he had all these like little letters and he was trying to like write like almost like a block, like it almost looked like a crossword puzzle, but it was like all these things that were saying in it. And he kept trying to do it. And he was trying to get it really clean looking, like where just every little like letter just came out, he would like dip it in ink and then like sit there and like kind of like make these rows. And he kept screwing it up. Like ink would fall off and kind of smudge it. And just, like the piece would kind of start getting dirty. And he was trying this process for like a year or two. And finally, it just hit him where it's just like, no, that's the look.
Right.
Like the drippy, messy, like smudgy. And it took him all that time to just get back to the very beginning of like where he was. But like he needed that journey, like he wouldn't have been able to just like hit. And now if you explain that to someone's like, oh, well, yeah, I could do that too. Just give me a couple letters and I'll just slap a bunch of stuff on. But it's like, but you didn't go through what that guy did to get there. So it's not the same. We're all different. We all go in at different speeds and for different directions. So and one big thing is like to not compare yourself to anybody. We all have a completely, like, your path and your life and your journey is completely different from mine versus anybody else in the world. We're all unique. We have certain talents, like you have talents that are far, better than mine and vice versa. And it's like being okay with that and just nurturing what you do have and say, well, I'm really good at this. Let me be the guy that's known for doing this, or just pursuing that a little bit more. But you still have to try sculpture. You might suck at it and be like, all right, well, not for me. I'm going to do something.
All right. So speaking of trying new things and sucking, it's like, it kind of brings me to like thinking about a lot of people listening to us speaking, listening to your music, watching us do our art. I think a lot of people, and this is unfortunate, they prevent themselves from trying things because I don't think a lot of people realize how messy and insecure the process is. Like, even people like yourself that's in a very successful band, you're doing artwork for cool things, like, you experience it, you've described it, and while we're talking, I've certainly experienced it, and yet I still talk to a lot of people that are like, oh, I wish I would try such and such, but I'm just sucky at it. It's like, you're supposed to be really awful at it, even after you're good at it, and like the beginning phases of these things is always terrible. Like, you're not supposed, anyone's rough sketch is like atrocious. It's like funny whenever I do stuff for like a client, like if I'm doing like a band poster or like something for like someone else that's involved, not just myself, and it's like I do a rough sketch and in my head I see what it's supposed to look like, and then I'll like have the moment where I have to hand it off to someone and explain, no, this scribble here is actually going to be this and blah 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 blah. And like when I work with people long enough, they kind of just know. But at first, they're like, what are you giving me? This is like a bunch of like scribbly wibbles. Like, what are you doing, dude?
We get a lot of that because all the artists that we work with for the concert posters, and what we get sometimes is so comical because you're just like, it's literally almost like stick figures of just like really like these like really crude drawings, but you have to just trust the artist because you look at the quality of what they're doing and you're like, well, I know that this will eventually turn into this. This is just making sure that like there's nothing obscene going on, or just it fits the kind of like motif that we're kind of working on. And very rarely have we ever been like, yeah, no, this isn't gonna work. Or you've got to change. It's like usually it's like we trust, like you vet the artist in the beginning because it's like if you don't want that artist, then don't work with them. So it's. But yeah, sometimes it's very comical to see the chicken scratch on a page, and it's like, no, that's gonna look really cool when I get it all done.
But in your head, you're like, no, this is like freaking amazing. Like, totally got it.
There's gonna be buildings and a sick,
stuff. Bro.
You're like, all right, man.
I want to get into obviously our collab, but I wanted to ask, are you cool on time if I jump into another couple topics? Are you good?
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering, after all this talk, like, is there what would like an alternate universe version of like Dave Foral be? Like, if let's say money was not an object, career responsibility was not an object, bills, none of that stuff. Like I'll give you a second to think while I riff off my own. Like, for me, I would love to like have a massive warehouse and do crazy ass sculptures and have someone else deal with the rest of it. I don't want to have to deal with any of it, but I would love to do sculptures. I'd love to do like 50-foot high murals with spray cans. I would love to I wish I was good enough to be in a band, like even just to play in a garage. Like, there's a lot of things that I wish I was like good enough. I would love to play in a jazz band. I'd love to be in a metal band. I'd love to like do all these different kinds of things if nothing else was an object. And I'd also love to be more of like a old master type painter. I would love to be doing life drawing and oil paints that are super refined, and everything in between. What does like an alternate version of you look like in different mediums?
I think that I'm pretty fortunate as far as like on the music side. Well, to take a step back, I think that like I would still be doing the same stuff, like things might be like what you said, it might be a little bit bigger. Like, I mean, it looks like we have about the same size studio,
Yeah.
just like stuff that we're kind of working on. But it would be nice to have that giant warehouse where you can just like lay out these giant canvases and throw paint around and just,
Make a mess.
do that, just make a complete mess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I follow a lot of artists, they're working in like these very large, scale projects, and you're like, that is so cool, like to be able to scale up that, that big. A little scary too, I mean, this stuff has to go somewhere, so you're probably commissioned it for something, and you're like, all right, these people are paying me a lot of money to do this thing. I can't mess it up.
This is an imaginary. This is a hypothetical imaginary.
Right. So, but I think it would just, I mean, maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, but it would literally just be doing what
It's awesome.
I'm doing. And I guess I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that. Like, I wouldn't change anything on our music side. It's like, we've had a great career. I mean, we're still putting out good music. We're touring the world. It's great.
Like, there's no side of you. There's no side of you that would love to be in like a hip hop band or like a metal band or a jazz trio or anything. Just for like, shits and giggles.
I'm kind of like an introvert, so like the whole producing music and writing music, just like in my studio, like I really like it.
That's cool, man. That's awesome.
I don't have to deal with a lot of people. I think it would be more on the art side, just kind of expanding that and doing and scaling up and doing, which I guess isn't impossible, but there's only so many hours in the day, and I think one of the hardest things for me is just juggling the whole, like, I'm married, so like I have to devote time to my wife and family and friends, and then
your dog,
so, and then I've got art, I've got music, I'm doing music production, and then just finding like free time where like you don't have to do anything, like to just be able to decompress. I mean, sometimes I get caught up in the week where like I'm like, oh man, like I'm just bouncing from project to project, and then I'm like, wait a minute, let me just like go for a walk, and just kind of like decompress and because then when you come back to it, like I always feel like if I'm like too much downtime, I start to get like a little bit nervous, like, oh, I'm just like wasting too much time, I should be producing. But I've come to like embrace that time and not just like rake myself over the coals to be like, oh, like you're kind of like, it's 5 o'clock and you checked out for the rest of the day. It's like every once in a while, I think you need to do that to be able to like, then when you come back to it, you're like fired up, because it doesn't make sense if you're there just kind of like chugging along doing mediocre stuff. You want to be like, everything that you do, you want to be passionate about.
Yeah, man. Speaking about being passionate, so for all the hardcore Dirtyheads fans listening, can you maybe share a story or two of like some of the more surreal moments of like pinch me moments in the past, whether from a long time ago or recent, like some stuff that might be like where you just take a step back, like, is this really my life? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things springing to your head. Some of them you probably can't say on a podcast, but like, if there's anything you can share, I'm sure people would like to hear some Dirtyhead stories.
Right. So I think for me, and you ask each of the guys, and they'll tell you something different. But for me, you ask a musician, oh, where's your favorite place to play? And everyone always says the same answer. Oh, it's Red Rocks, and I remember going there for the first time, and I forget, I think we opened for, I think it was like Sublime with Rome. I think that was one of like the first Sublime with Rome tours. And we played Red Rocks. And I don't know if, have you been to Red Rocks?
Not for a show, but I've been there just when I was in Colorado, and it was beautiful.
So the bowl is pretty steep. I mean, it's like, there's, people get up there and they'll run the steps and everything. And I just remember walking out on the stage, and it holds just under 10,000 people. And it's not that wide, so it's this giant, like kind of, V-shaped type of thing. And I just remember walking out on the stage, and you could literally see the last person at the very top. It just feels like a wall of people is like stacked on top of you. And I usually don't get nervous for shows, or like, have anxiety. I mean, there's a little bit of like good, just like, hey, let's get out there and let's kill it. But that was like the first time where I walked out, and it was just like, oh my God, like this is just like, these people are just like right on top of you, and there's a lot of people, and they're all, you can see, usually like, if you play a big festival, there's a crowd. At some point you kind of like stop seeing faces. It's just kind of become like a blur off in the distance.
Yeah.
But you can see the face of the last person up at the top, and it just feels like And like we always say that like playing small shows is worse than big shows, because when you play a big show, it's just a sea of people, and you don't focus on any one thing.
Yeah.
If you play a small show and there's 20 people there, you notice when someone gets up and goes to the bathroom, notice when like people are like turning around having a conversation and like not paying attention to what you're doing. So it's like very like nerve wracking, if a couple people leave, that's like a fifth of your audience just left, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
And I remember then every year we would play Red Rocks, and it would get less like nerve wracking to be on that stage. And at some point, I remember just walking out and feeling really comfortable. And I felt like, okay, I finally like, we deserve to be here. This is very powerful. And I'm living within that moment instead of like living in this like almost like micro fear state where you're like, this is like, this is overwhelming. And all these people are like looking at us and they're right on top of us.
Yeah.
Where I feel like it felt like, okay, now I could just concentrate on like giving people the best show possible. And it was a good feeling. It was very empowering to know that like you're kind of controlling your emotions at that point and not letting the outside world control you.
How about a juicy story?
I don't know if I can.
Okay. Well, anything PG rated? All right. How about
PG?
this? How about I'm sure you have a lot of fans or your people you've come across that maybe are higher profile. Have there been like people that you've met, fans, whatever, that you might be a fan of, whether it's an actor or musician, whoever? Have there been people where you're like, this is a really freaking cool job I met so and so or whatever? Like,
we didn't meet him, but we played Chicago one time and he was there, and we didn't find out until afterwards. And then we were really bummed. We were like, oh, like you should have brought him back and like to say hi. But Ray Liotta was there.
Oh, that's cool.
And he, such a great actor, and he passed away, a little while ago. But we were just like, man, like why would he be at our show? That's so weird. Like, is he a closet like reggae rock fan? Like, we wanted to know more, but we were never able to like link back up with him. But it was really cool that he was there.
Man, I wish you lived closer for a lot of reasons, but one reason in particular, there we go, that's a word. I just got myself my first bass. I think it's like part of my like midlife crisis type vibe. I've been playing guitar for a long time, and it's so interesting when you like pick up a new instrument. Like even though I have been messing around noodling on guitar, like when I just picked up bass, and I'm like so much more aware of like bass lines. Like I find I've never really noted, unless it's an obvious bass line. There's a lot of songs where you just don't notice because I'm focused on the singing or the overall song.
Right.
It's like so interesting. I'm not going anywhere with that. I'm just sharing it.
I think the music that you listen to also has, because typically in rock, maybe the reason why you didn't notice it so much is because a lot of times in rock the bass just kind of follows, just kind of chugs along and just plays like these like 16th notes or 8th notes or something in a very uniform pattern. And that's why there's a ton of memes out there online. Like, no one cares about the bass player. Just, like if he were not to be there, no one would even notice or whatever. But I think what really got me into bass was listening to Bob Marley. And the bass lines in that, they had a melody to them. Yeah. Like you could sing and hum the bass lines. And it's almost like it flipped to where like the guitar becomes the percussive instrument, where the guitar is just doing this little like skanks where there's just like checka, checka, checka. So it's almost like that's a rhythm, the piano maybe doing the rhythm too. I mean, it's still kind of doing that little offbeat, skank, but the bass line is gluing everything together. I mean, it's meshing with that kick drum. And it's like you could almost like hum Bob Marley, like bass lines as like the sub melody of the song. And that's what like was like, I want to do that. Like that is awesome. And so that really kind of got me like thinking of the bass in a different way of like, wow, you can like, that's a voice and you can say something, where doing this, just like that's not really having a conversation. But, I mean, Family Man is an incredible, I mean, if you go back and just really kind of studied like all the Family Man stuff, like in all those like old Bob Marley records, insane stuff. Just his like timing and like finding the little like pockets of like being not on like the main, like, like downbeats and upbeats, like finding the space in between that and filling in all those like really weird, like kind of polyrhythms and cadences and stuff. It's very unique. So like him and James Jamerson are probably two of my favorite, bassists of all time. And Jamerson, I don't know if you've gotten into him, but he's responsible for all that Motown magic. Like he's probably recorded on like more number one hit songs than anybody in the world. And he was like the only Motown musician that wasn't able to leave and go tour. It's like all these different guys would come into Motown and like they would, kind of form, we have a couple of different guitar players, a couple of different drummers, and a really hot artist would come in and record this smash record and then be like, okay, you guys need to go on the road and tour this and make your rounds. And he wasn't allowed to leave because he was like the glue that just kind of like, everything just kind of like it didn't sound Motown unless Jamerson was playing bass on it. So his stuff is just incredible.
I'm going to write this down. Jamerson. Okay.
James Jamerson. So check him out. But cool. Look at his discography, and it's just like all the songs. You're like, oh yeah, he did that. Oh, he did that. Yeah, it's just it's just
that down.
Hit after hit after hit.
I think
he has a melody, like his sense of like melody, like finding a melody that's not stepping on the vocal melody, like that is what made Jamerson just genius. Of just like, normally you'd be like, wow, you are playing a crazy busy bass line. It's way too busy. But you hear it in the songs and you're like, no, that song wouldn't be that song without that line. It needs to be there. So he mastered the art of just like finding his own little like lane and doing the most you can do within that little, pocket that you don't want to get out of. But his stuff is just incredible. And he played everything with one finger.
What? Why?
They called him the hook. He just sat there and just played on with one finger.
Any reason why you could think of?
I don't know. I mean, you pick up bad habits,
right? And you can't lose them.
Starting out because you maybe don't know that like you can use other things, or maybe he just felt more comfortable with one, and then he just got really. But you can't tell. Like you listen to his bass lines, and they're hard to play with two fingers. And it's like this guy was just. I think because he started out with upright, so maybe he just like got so used to just kind of like using one finger, with that. Where I think a lot of most upright bass lines, you kind of just. I don't think. I mean, unless you're kind of like dribbling, but like a lot of them.
Do you play upright, kind of like, Dave?
I do not. Okay. I've always wanted one, but that's a whole other beast. But I think that's kind of why he started just using, because back in the day they didn't have amps. So like if you're playing the bass, you really had to like pop those strings to get a louder sound.
Yeah.
And you would always use that one finger to kind of to pluck those. And so I think when he transferred to electric, that's just his mode of playing. But
wasn't until like the late 50s, right? Isn't that when the first electric bass came about, something like that? I asked you about some surreal moments, and when you said Family Man, it's now I'm taking a double note in my head about this. I'll name drop is a surreal moment in my career. One of the cooler things that happened in my art career, like earlier on, is like I found out that Stefan from Dave Matthews Band was a fan of mine, and I ended up going to I brought my daughter when she was 10 months old to a show, and we became friends ever since. And like I was texting him saying, hey, I just got a bass, I figured he would, find that, I don't know why. I just told him because I was like, hey, I admire his playing. And the first thing he responded back was, that's dope. You should learn Family Man's lines. And I was like, okay, and you just said the exact same thing. So I know my musical homework. Which we're going to get into the collab in a second, but I want to ask you, because you seem like a kind of person, and I don't think I touched on this topic in previous conversations either. Like, are you someone that's kind of spiritual? Like, do you believe in like the law of attraction or some Dave version of that? Like, were you maybe in before all your career accolades have happened, like were you kind of, whether it was formal with a vision board or whether it was just like thinking over and over again what you wanted to manifest, has that been a part of your career and your life?
Absolutely. So going back, I was in a band before Dirtyheads for about 10 years. And it was kind of one of those things where you started right out of high school. You really don't know what you're doing. You see a little bit of success, and then you kind of get like disillusioned where you think that like, oh, we're gonna make it, and then year goes by, and like another year goes by, another year. And then, so I was starting different businesses at the time. I think I had like a t-shirt silk screening company back in the day.
Right.
And so when all that kind of like that business failed. I learned a lot from it, which is great. Like one of the best things you can do is start a business and have it fail.
Yeah.
And use it as a learning lesson of like what not to do. Like some things worked and some things didn't. And I think it's like I could have went to college and spent the same amount of money on a business degree, or I could have just like had a failed I probably spent less money with the fail than I would have if I went and got like a master's in business. But you really learn like real world applications of what not to do. So in the demise of all that, I really kind of started taking a look at my life of like, where's my time going? I feel like I'm always busy, right? But I never had any money. I wasn't like making anything. And I got this book from Tim Ferriss called The 4-Hour Workweek.
Oh, dude, that's a great book.
Great book. So a lot of his examples are very extreme. He's trying to push stuff to the limit to try to show you like, there's no limits of this, of how far you can actually push stuff out to achieve a 4-hour work week. So most people can't do it, but there were some overtones in there that really, one good tip that I will say that I've implemented to this day is I turn off all notifications for emails, any of that stuff. Cause I found that like, I'd be working on something and that little bing, pop up at the bottom of your screen, and you're like in the middle of an email and you're like, okay, I should be finishing this, but let me just go see what this is. And then that task will be like, oh, hey, like we just wanted to get back with you. And can you make that change on this thing? And at the time I started a graphic design company. So then I was just kind of doing, graphic design and some web design.
Yeah.
So then it was like, see that as like, well, that's a 5-minute task that I could just like do real quick and get it off my plate.
Right.
And then you're doing that. And then another email comes in and then you jump to that. And then you find that like blocks of time, like half the day will go by, sometimes the entire day. And you go back and you haven't even finished that first email that you were going to send out at like 9 a.m. And it just like, it's so bad for time management, So I learned a really good tip is to just turn off all those notifications. And sometimes it kind of bites me, because like we'll be out on the road and like an email will come in from management.
Yeah.
And then I'll have no idea, like, because I don't get a notification. I check my email maybe, a couple times a day, but it's not like as like a text message comes through and people will be like talking about something. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, didn't you read the email? And I'm like, no. Okay, hold on. Let me go back. So that's one good advice that I've learned is like, get rid of the email, like bing, chime notification thing. Just turn all that stuff off.
Yeah, 100%.
When you finish a project, then where your email's at. That there's stuff coming in all the time. Like you don't need to be bothered and right. It's nothing is crucial where you have to get it. Unless you're like a heart surgeon or something, it's like you probably don't need to be notified about stuff like every minute of the day. Another thing that it taught me was like accountability for your time. Like where is your time most effective? And are you putting more time into that or all these other things? So I did a task that was really important. I started calculating like my days, I would like, okay, what, like 2 hours worked on this project, then I took lunch, then I, jumped over here for like an hour. I answered emails for an hour. Then I went back to this project and worked on this project for the end of the day. And what I was noticing that I was spending big blocks of time working for that band that I was in. I probably calculated about 20 hours a week that I would put in for this band, and I kind of did, I was like manager, booking agent. I had the t-shirt company. So I would be printing t-shirts. I would get like the CDs printed. I would do the artwork for everything, posters, flyers, like everything. And it wasn't returning anything.
Yeah.
I was in a big band. I was splitting paychecks with like, 8 or 9 other people. But I was putting in like an obscene amount of work. And so that's when I kind of started reining everything in. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. We got to delegate. We got to divide everything up. That was kind of the beginning for me of that band. And I ended up leaving that band. And like 3 months later, I get a call from Duddy and he's like, yo, hey, do you want to like come try out for, like we're looking for a bass player for our band. And, like we really need one. Do you want to come and try out? So I almost feel like, so to get back to what you're really, originally saying. So during that time, I was reading a lot of self-help books, just like, how can I make my life better? How can I improve? And at some point you kind of get down the rabbit hole so much where it's like, well, I can read all these books till I'm blue in the face. And in theory, I know what to do, but I need to start doing it and actually like applying it to like my life and just like start moving forward. So I don't know. It's like if I hadn't started doing that, I would not have been available for when Duddy called me to be like, yo, do you want to try out for us? Because I still would have been in another band. And I think he was asking around, and there was like 2 or 3 mutual friends that he talked to that was like, hey, you're looking for a bass player. You should call this guy Dave. He was in this other band, but now he's not in a band anymore.
Okay.
So automatically it was kind of like manifesting itself where it's like me taking accountability for my life, for my time, what my time is worth, to the world. And that's a pretty hard concept. Like when you ask people like, what's your time worth to you? Most people won't give you, because one, they either don't know, or two, it's so low that they're almost embarrassed to say like, okay, well, if I break out my hours, like I'm worth like this much, and it's like, well, could you maximize that? Can you make that more?
Right.
And then take tasks that like you're doing. Me and my wife are getting into it because it's like, I'm out there. Like sometimes I like getting out, like cutting the hedges and stuff. And she's like, just hire a gardener. Like it's not worth your time. And I'm like halfway she's right. Yes. Right. Like it would be more efficient if I just paid a gardener to every 6 months, trim this little hedge, and I could be inside working on art, music, and kind of furthering my career. Sometimes it's a nice break where it's like, well, now we don't have to go to the gym today because I'm out here doing all this like physical activity. So I'm like kind of balancing it. If it gets a little bit worse, then maybe I'll hire someone to do that. But it's kind of a nice break for me. But like taking accountability for your life and asking yourself very serious questions. And it's tough. It's tough to like look at yourself and be like, what am I worth? What do I think I'm worth? Like, what am I worth now? What do I think that I'm worth? And how do I get to that point to where it all makes sense? But yeah, reading a lot of those books was definitely an eye opener as far as like manifesting things. The Secret was another great book.
100%. I've listened to that like 100 times at least.
And it's true because like, there's a synergy that starts to happen, right? Like if you just sit in your room and don't do anything, nothing will ever happen. No one's ever going to knock on your door. There's going to be zero opportunity. It's when you start getting out of your comfort zone. Like it's scary. It's scary if you don't know how to paint or draw to start painting and drawing. Like you said it earlier, it's going to look like crap. Like it's not going to look good. But then like, what do? Like no one's born gifted to draw. Like we all have to like study. Some people learn faster than others, but it's all doable. It's all achievable, And so just doing that, but that's going to unlock one little door, and you're not going to win by doing one thing, people ask about the success of our group. And it was like, I don't know if you could sum it up to like one specific thing. It's just a lot of hard work day after day, putting in the time that will eventually lead to bigger successes. And so, some people say that it's like, oh, it's like, you there's like this like energy in the world. And it's like, I really believe that like, the fate is in your own hands. Yeah. It's not just, oh, like some greater force will shine his light down on us and make everything great for us. It's like, no, like, your decisions affect your life, and negatively too. Like if you, get into drugs and just like, have a bad marriage and all this stuff, it's like, then one day you're going to wake up and like, you're going to be on the street and go like, well, how did I get here? It's like, oh, it's very, very obvious how you got there. You made a bunch of bad decisions that led you down this path. But the reverse is also true of that. Like you could make good decisions and do great things with your life. Success comes not very easy, for most people. Some people might get lucky and you might hear, some success story of like, oh, this guy just did this for the first time and it worked and, great for him. But with music, we always say that it takes 7 to 10 years, and being honest with yourself. Like you have to believe in yourself and know that there's a quality there that it's good, but it's not going to happen overnight. And same thing with art. Like, there's a ton of people that go to art school, but like how many successful artists are out there? A lot fewer. Why? And it's like, it's not because of the talent. Like, you can sell anything, art is an interpretation of just, like some people like it, some people might not, but where did they go wrong? And most of the time when you hear stories of like, oh, I like dropped out of art school, it's like, well, there you go right there. Like that was half the struggle, but then like you didn't stay consistent with something, and I think that if you just continue to do something and continue to chip away, be honest with yourself and always be learning, because the you of tomorrow should be better than the you of today. And if you're honest with yourself, then you understand that, and you know that, well, then there's things today that I need to do to get to my better self tomorrow. And if you're neglecting that, it's going to show. And then you're going to look back in 10 years and be like, I didn't go anywhere in 10 years. It's like, yeah, but did you do everything that you were supposed to?
Right.
Most of the time, the answer is no.
A lot of wisdom right there, man. It's really true. And it's interesting. I love talking to successful creative people, because there's so much left, right, brain balance. Like, you have to have the work ethic. You can't be someone that's like a loosey-goosey artist that just blames everyone for their failures. Like, you have to take personal responsibility, and that's not something a lot of artists and musicians, I don't hear a lot of artists and musicians saying things like that. Like, take responsibility, budget your time, like you said. I actually do the same thing. I'm so anal to the point where I have an app that whenever I start or end something, I like hit the button. At the end of the day, I have reports. Okay, I spent this much time on art, this much time on emails, whatever, and each thing is in like a subcategory. Okay, I spent this much time on work, this much time with my family, and then I could kind of see. One of the books that helped me early on is like Tony Robbins' books. I like listened to all of them on audiobook like hundreds of times, and he's always talking about kind of balancing the spokes in the wheel. And I kind of like look and see, okay, this area of my life is like kind of not doing so good. I got to put more time into it, making certain things non-negotiable, right? Whether it's like, time, energy, money, whatever. So yeah, those are important things. Like you mentioned, so the guys in the Dirtyheads like called you to kind of, be a part of the band or join the band. What point in their career were they at when they kind of said, "Hey, Dave, you want to be a part of this?"
I think so. The group started with Jared, Duddy, and John. And they were kind of this like very stripped down acoustic. Duddy played guitar, John played percussion, and Jared was just a rapper. He didn't sing. He was just kind of known as like the rapper guy. And over time, so then they made a record. Like they connected with our manager at a very early stage. I think they played a couple like little demo tapes in their garage with little like 4-track recorder or whatever. And it so they got lucky. Like they're like they usually it's like you're in a band for years until you find management, but they kind of stumbled upon our manager at a very early age. And he had some dealings with them in the music industry. He had worked, helped put some stuff together with like Guns N' Roses and Korn. And so he kind of was like mixing it up in that kind of world. And he got him signed to Warner Brother Records. And I remember when that happened, because the band that I was in, we were a reggae hip hop band, like this fusion band. I mean, our influences were like Born Jamaicans, the Fugees, and just obviously reggae, obviously a lot of hip hop, and just but there wasn't a lot of groups that were doing that at that time. So when they got signed, most people would probably be like, be hating on other bands, like, oh, they got signed, we didn't. I was actually really happy. Like I was like, man, if they got signed and it does well, like I had so much success for them that meant that like the industry was like, oh, we need to look for other bands that are like this. So like I kind of from the very beginning, I was like very like, I want these guys to go as big and as far as they can, because from the trickle down effect, we'll get snatched up in that too. Because there wasn't a lot of groups that were doing what we were doing. And so they got signed. They recorded this amazing record. It's called Any Port in a Storm. And it was right at the time where the whole industry was collapsing, like the Napster, LimeWire, like everybody was stealing music. Record labels were going downhill, really quick. So they got shelved. Like they recorded this album, and I just remember going like, oh yeah, they got signed, they recorded an album, and then I never heard it drop. And like a year went by, 2 years, and I was like, whatever happened to the Dirtyheads? Like they were supposed to be like this huge group that like on this major label that's going to blow up. And just they, like the record, Warner Brothers took on enough water, started closing down, all their stuff. And they eventually got the album back out of Warner Brothers. I think they just felt bad. They were like, well, dude, we're putting your guys' life on hold. You should be out there touring. Like, here's the album, have fun, go do whatever. And so I think at that point they were like, all right, well, we need to start putting together a band. So they found Matt, they needed a drummer. Mm-hmm. They found him, and they were touring with the DJ. And I remember, I was working at Cal State at the time, running sound. And I remember them playing there one day, and I went and checked them out. And yeah, it was John was playing percussion, Matt was playing drums, Duddy was playing guitar, and then they had a DJ Rocky Rock, who I think he DJs for like Black Eyed Peas and a bunch of other groups. and that was the group. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I think they shifted over. Rocky got pretty busy, so he couldn't spend a lot of time with the group anymore. So Rocky left, and then I think they were just like, we need to find a band, and the only thing that they were lacking was a bass player at that point. And so that's when Duddy was like, all right, we're going to call. I think they were auditioning different guys, and I think they found a guy that was playing with them for a little bit, and he was a hired gun. And I think they were kind of sick of like going on these tours, making no money, and they would come back and like the bass player would getting paid like every show. And I think they were like, we can't do this anymore. Someone that's like a team player that's like, all right, if we make $1, we all share that $1. If we make no dollars, we're all broke. And I was willing to do it. And it was kind of weird because like I'm a couple years older than those guys. And I had already been, I already went on this musical journey for 10 years with this other group. And I was kind of getting out of that. And I was like, all right, well, I'm still going to do music, but maybe I'll just focus on production and just being in the studio, producing music for other people. And when I got that call, it was like the only group that I would have joined out of any other group in the scene that I truly believed in. That I heard their album and I was like, wow, this is like really great music. It had any other group hit me up and been like, yo, we're looking for a bass player, I would have told them, I just did this for 10 years. It didn't work. I'm making a shift in my life and doing something else. And I took a gamble. I mean, I was like, a lot older when I was like jumping in a van and just touring around the nation in a van, driving ourselves, lugging our gear in, driving through blizzards for no money, and then, but I believed in it. That was like the only group that I was like, these guys are going to do something. And I truly believe in what they're doing.
Dude, what a freaking story, man. I can't even imagine. God, what comes to mind is like, I was talking to my wife about this a few weeks ago. We were watching some music documentary and I was like, it's such a fine line between like the artists, the musicians, the bands that make it and the ones that don't. And it's like, if you look back in like music history as a, for instance, if someone like Jim Morrison or Kurt Cobain or any of those like legends, if they didn't make it, they'd be looked at as like the biggest losers. They'd be like heroin addicts on the street, dirty, smelly, yellow teeth, whatever. Like, and it's like, but because something happened in life, whatever, the universe made it happen for them, all of a sudden they're like gods. And it's like so interesting. It's like, here you are telling me this story, like you're a little bit older, you're in a van, you're like taking a chance, and it could have went either way, right? Like you could have had the same amount of talent and not had any number of like turns in the road. And then you would have looked back and like, why did I just do that? I'm older and wasting my time, but yet it worked. And it's like, people love the success story, but it could have went either way. But what I'm hearing is like, you got to be willing to take a chance. I think like that's one of the things, like for me, I'm at the point in my life and I have kids and whatnot where I look back and I'm like, I see a lot of people like my age or our age group that make like 20 times more money than I do. And I'm like, like it's hard to, I'm going to be totally honest, and it's hard to not look back at times and think like, should I have taken a more traditional path? Like, should I have studied finance and worked really hard for 10, 15 years and retired? Like, and it's hard to not play that game in your head. But then there's a side of me that like, since I was a kid, I wanted to kind of see where this art thing would take me. There's like a part of me that's like, let's see what I'm capable of. Because I know like, I feel like looking back with regret feels a lot worse than failing and trying. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around. But hearing that story from you, that's kind of what I get. I want to dive into one of the things that kind of brings us together, like NFTs and our love of like Web3 and technology. And, we're coming out with this collab, which feels like it's been in the works for 20 years, even though I've only officially met you a couple of years ago. It feels like it's going on forever. I'm like, is this really happening? Like, whoa.
I think that's good though, because it shows that we're both very busy.
Yeah.
It's I've got a crazy tour schedule. You're constantly pumping out art. I wish I can keep up with your output because you're just always, I don't know
about that, dude.
Always grinding.
You're doing a great job, man.
But it needed to be comfortable. It's like when I've got time, I worked on it and we were kicking it back and forth. And I really like that. Like, it's like you would draw something, send it back to me. I would fill in a little bit more, send it back to you and that kind of back and forth. But just, it didn't feel rushed. And I told, my manager, Mike, the whole time I was like, this needs to just feel natural. And I don't want to make it feel like it's a chore for any of us. And it's like, we want to work on this. And it worked. I mean, it definitely took a little bit of time to get there, but we hit the finish line.
I gotta
that's
say, like, I personally, I'm being very biased here, but I think it came out freaking awesome. And when I look back at the process, I like you said, I really enjoyed the process. Like, so I don't have like the musical collaborative experience that you do. So for you, you're experiencing this constantly, where you're working with other people. Like this room I'm in, this is my like, here's my invisible coworkers. Like, and so to have someone else like be involved with the creative process that's not a client was like really fun for me. And especially those conversations early on where we're like, where do you want to go with this? Like literally blank page, like where should we go? And we kind of started off with like something that you wanted to do was like some of your really cool like surreal crazy creatures, and like, and then we started riffing on it, and I thought like it'd be cool to throw in some of my aquatic elements, and like I kind of saw what you were doing, you kind of saw what I was doing, and it was like that fun back and forth process. You sent me over some creatures. I'm like, oh, I could see this happening. And I remember the point where you like sent me over like the almost final versions of the creatures, and it's like you kind of gave me a little creative freedom, which I appreciated. You're like, kind of take these and do what you want. And I like took a couple of them and I put them above the water, and I thought that would be a really cool element. And then you saw what I did, and you went back in and embellished and moved some stuff around, and it was like a cool process, and I think we did something really special.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I'm stoked how it turned out.
And so real quick on NFTs, people that are listening that are like, oh geez, eye roll, NFTs, seriously. I think that, you know, people like us have a little bit of a different angle. We're not necessarily in on it for like the cartoon monkey faces smoking cigars. That's not our thing. I think both of us, like from conversations we've had, kind of look, you know, at NFTs as like a technology. It's like a medium, a technology, like a vehicle for, you know, authenticating artwork and for creating a new way to collect artwork. And, you know, people that think about NFTs with sort of like an eye roll mentality don't realize how much of our life is already digital. Like we see the value of like a blue check mark on an app. You know, we see the value of like how many followers you have, how many likes, and all those things are kind of like invisible, made up out of thin air type assets, right? And so as like VR and AR and all these different things happen, it only makes sense to me that we take our digital world and mesh it together with the physical world, and like we have collectibles and artwork. I'd love for you to speak on NFTs in whatever capacity you want, because I want fans and friends of ours to kind of hear where this is for us and how we can make sense of it all.
Sure. So I think NFTs mean different things for different people. You know, there's different reasons why people get into that space. Some people look at it almost like a stock, you know, like an investment type of thing, to where, okay, I'm going to buy this Bored Ape, and then, you know, in 6 months it's going to be worth, you know,
$6 trillion.
yeah. So that's one aspect of it. You know, the problem with that, which is great, and if that's, you know, I know people that they do that for a living. They're just sitting there constantly, you know, scouring, you know, discords and getting on whitelists and just like flipping, you know, these things. And it's like, you can make a living doing that, you know, just like how you can make a living playing the stock market, you know, and some people do that. But that's not for everyone, you know, and if you don't really know what you're doing, that's a full-time job. Like, you really have to like do your homework, research these companies, be there when drops happen. It's no different than working any other job. So, I mean, that is legitimate, but a lot of people can get hurt doing that too. And that's why, like, one of the original things getting into space, people always say you should only buy the art if you truly love the art. That way you can never, you know, if the value goes away, you still have the art. And there's a reason why you got that art in the first place, hopefully because you just art for art's sake. Like, it evokes an emotion out of you and you enjoy it, right? So there's some projects that I've bought and I don't care the value. Like, I don't check it constantly to see if it's gone up. Like, it doesn't matter, because I'm not going to sell it, because I actually just love the art. And I've got a little like digital frame in my house, and they're up there, and it's like, that makes me happy. I walk by and there's a little goofy like digital cat that just like, you know, it's like moves, and it's like, that makes me smile. So I don't care if that goes to zero and that whole project goes away. It's like, I'm still going to enjoy that little cat. Mm-hmm. I think for me, what NFTs, you know, and I can't take credit for this analogy, but the best analogy that I've heard, you know, that compares to what, you know, what value, you know, like NFTs have in my life, is the whole wristband, you know, analogy, where people are like, well, what does it get you? What does that mean? It's like, well, it's the same thing as a wristband, where that piece of, you go into a festival and you could have a wristband, and that wristband, the value of that actual little piece of paper is like not even a penny. It's like, it's literally worthless. But what that wristband gets you, people will pay thousands and thousands of, for like an all access backstage wristband for Coachella, like people will pay thousands of dollars for that stuff, So now that puts the burden into like, okay, well, now what do I provide those people? Like I'm not a concert where I can just let people have, backstage access, but I can have access to many other things. Like, so, it's like I put out, art, I have like kind of like jewelry drops and all these different type of drops that I do. Well, now I can give people early access to that and just incentivize people to like, hey, you're basically, when you're buying an NFT, you're buying a Dave Foral VIP discounted wristband that at any time in the future, I can decide, okay, like this drop is only going to be for people that have the wristband, or everyone who has a wristband can get 25% off of this drop, or I'm just going to give you free stuff. Like I can airdrop you free stuff. I can like mail you free stuff. I mean, there's a ton of possibilities to just basically reward people. And people use this word a lot, the community. That's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say, hey, in the world, all the people that know about me and my art, that's my community. And I want to be able to service my community and reward people to say, hey, you're inundated with so much stuff in life, whether, advertising and just things to do in your life. It's very overwhelming. And if you take a little sliver of your life and like come over into my world, like I'm very grateful grateful for that and appreciative that I want to reward you for that and make a positive experience to where you want to come back and continue to support my art. Because, I mean, just like you, it's like, that's how we earn a living. I mean, hopefully what we're doing is impactful to other people. And it's like that little cat on the wall. It's like, they buy a J print, they put it up on the wall, and every time they walk by, they smile and go, yeah, that's where I want to be on that wave right now, and so it's powerful. And it's our way of kind of like returning that favor and saying, thank you for believing in us. We're gonna give you something.
Yeah, a lot of people will ask things like, what are you going to do with it? What do you do with an NFT? And like the way I try to answer people is like, for anyone's old enough to remember back and be old enough to remember like 95, 96 era, MP3s were like a newer thing then. I remember my first friends getting MP3s. I'm like, what the hell are you buying music digitally for? Like, I had some really nerdy friends that were very early into it, and they had like clunky players, or they'd sit there and put it on their compact desktop, and they'd sit there next to their desk playing music. I'm like, you guys are nerds. Like, what are you doing? And it wasn't until like the iPod came out that everyone's like, oh, now I get it. You could actually do something with this. And I truly believe that sometime in the future, Apple or someone will have like the iFrame or whatever it might be, some kind of hardware thing where like people that are early adopters that have these pieces from us or other artists will then have an obvious way to take them, transfer them, collect them, display them. And it may not be obvious yet, but like you said with the wristband analogy, like there's a collectability to it. There's also like a nostalgia and like a historical element to it. Like this piece we put together is a first. It has like an historical, authentic element to it. And I think people that collect this piece from us in the future and currently will be able to enjoy it, and hopefully it does go up in value. But that's not why we did it, right? So but there is that level of like, let's see, where this goes. But also, hey, I was one of the first people to have that, and I know your manager and my friend Mike will kill us if we don't say kind of what's gonna go on with this. So Mike, this one's for you, bro. So like the first people that collect our NFT are actually not just getting an NFT, right? But they're also getting a signed and numbered print. So we have like these prints that we did from our artwork. You sign them, send them to me. I sign them, I send them over to Mike. And the first 50 people that get these NFTs are going to get a signed physical print. So they're also getting that as well. So I think that's a pretty cool thing, and I think it came out really dope. I'm excited to share with everyone, which I think we were talking about, like the reveal will be pretty soon, and then, stay tuned, but it's going to be available pretty soon, so get your hard wallets ready. If you don't know how to do it, like hit up one of us, and we'll help you kind of navigate the arena,
Oh, yeah.
Any other words of wisdom? Any other topics? Anything going on, whether now or in the future? You know, anything I didn't touch upon that you want to bring up?
Um, I don't know. I've just been grinding away. You know, I feel like I've had like kind of a lull because I've just been like in the studio working on a lot of stuff, you know, music and art. But I think this next year, I'm trying to look at getting out into like some booth space. You know, we perform at a lot of these like big reggae rock festivals across the country, and they always have booths there. And I see other artists, and I'm always kind of like, that's cool. I think the hardest thing for me is like coming up with enough stuff to even like have a booth. You know, that's always a struggle. Like I don't have a lot of time. So when I do make something, I put up on the site. I try not to like flood the market with too much stuff so that there's always kind of like, you know, a demand for it. So it's just physically coming up with enough like product to where I, you know, feel comfortable with the booth. So I don't know. I mean, if we're on the East Coast, you know, maybe if you want to do it like a little collab booth sometime.
That would be awesome. It would be so sick to like have our NFT holders like be allowed in to watch us spray paint a wall or something, like to like do some kind of live painting thing would be freaking sick. So I know people can find you on like daveforal.com, right? How about your socials? I don't know them off the top of my head. Is it just at David Foral?
Yeah, at Instagram is at David_Foral, and then Twitter is just at David Foral.
Okay, awesome.
If there is going to be a Twitter anymore, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what's going on this week.
I think it's going to be. I think it's going to work. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I have a little bit of their stock, so selfishly, I hope it does okay.
Okay, I'm rooting for Twitter.
I'm going to probably send you some horrible videos of me over the next month playing bass, and you can pick me apart.
Yeah, do it. Learn some Family Man.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm going to. It's my homework, man. Dude, thanks, Dave. I appreciate this. It's so good to talk shop. Like I said, like so much of my life is just alone, locked in my studio, and it's so nice to talk shop with like people that kind of understand your path. So I appreciate that, and I really am enjoying like kind of nurturing a friendship with you and connecting on this collab. It's just been super fun, man. So thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, it was an honor to be on your podcast, and yeah, I mean, hopefully we can work on some more stuff in the future. This project was really cool concept. I know we were kind of testing the waters with things, but I mean, I was stoked on how everything came out. So hopefully, yeah, we can definitely do some stuff in the future.
I think Mike was telling me that we're going to try to do like a Instagram live at some point. So if anyone's listening, keep an eye on our socials, and if that happens, you'll know about it. So, all right, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
All right, man.